Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana did not have an easy job having to deliver the budget speech for 2022. Trying to balance paying off government debt while trying to stimulate economic growth is quite a big challenge, and many people, including myself, were quite a little bit concerned about what tax hikes he might have had up his sleeves, especially since we are all still suffering from the aftermath of COVID-19, rising inflation, interest rate hikes, and significant fuel and electricity price increases. Surprisingly though, the tax changes for the next year are quite reasonable and actually quite favorable for some of us. But there are, of course, still some major concerns that we need to address that were not really covered in the speech that I believe are important for every ordinary South African to know about. So if you don't want to read through this 23-page document like this guy, then this video is for you, as I will be highlighting everything you need to know about the tax changes in South Africa, as well as explain what that means for us normal Joes and Janes. And no, I am no tax expert. I'm just a vet who likes to talk about money, trying to help my fellow South Africans understand how the whole world of personal finance works. So, without further ado, let's look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of the budget speech for 2022. Okay, so right off the bat, SARS managed to bring in 182 billion rand, more than was expected from personal income tax and VAT collections during the past financial year. This was mostly thanks to the rise in commodity prices and increased consumer spending after the pandemic. Now, although this did help reduce government debt and to increase the support for the poor and unemployed, and thus in turn to stop the expected blow of an increase in taxes, this extra revenue is not an accurate representation of an improvement in the capacity of our economy, as Mr. Enoch pointed out, and that we should not really count on the mining shortfall for too much longer. But this did put us in a much stronger position that we had been a year ago, hence why we have much more favorable tax adjustments this year, which we will now have a look at. Let's start with the one that affects us the most, the personal income tax brackets. These have been increased by 4.5%, which is in line with the projected inflation rate by Treasury for the 2022-2023 financial year. This means that while you should get an increase in your annual salary every year that is also in line with inflation, this shift in the tax brackets will prevent you from paying more in taxes and thereby getting less back from your salary than what you did the year before. So this is a good thing, as if this increase has not been implemented, you will pay away most of your salary increase in taxes. This relief is mainly targeted at people in the middle income group, which is again a good thing, because this group is responsible for paying the majority of taxes in South Africa, thereby subsidizing most of the country that do not pay any taxes at all. So it is nice to help lift the tax burden of this group for a change. Now, I don't personally think that South Africa's inflation rate will only be 4.5%, given what is currently happening in the world, especially with the tension between Russia and Ukraine, causing a ripple effect on the world's economy and the rising inflation rates in the US, but this is at least a benchmark to work from and thus a step in the right direction. Alongside the personal income tax brackets, the personal tax rebates for individuals have also increased by 4.5%. A tax rebate is basically a certain amount of income that you do not have to pay any taxes on. These rebates are different depending on your age, but luckily all of them saw an increase for 2022. The annual tax threshold for taxpayers under the age of 65 years increased from 83,300 to 91,250 rand. For those between the ages of 65 and 75, it increased from 135,150 rand to 141,250 rand. And for those over the age of 75 years, it increased from 151,100 to 157,900 rand. This is great, especially for low-income earners, as this allows them to keep more of the money in their pockets at the end of every month. The medical tax credits have also increased by 4.5% this year, which is also great, as this is not really something that gets adjusted every single year. You and your first dependent will be allowed a monthly tax credit of 347 Rand, which is an increase from 332 Rand. And for each additional dependent, you will receive 234 Rand, which is an increase from 224 Rand. A medical tax credit is basically something that helps to lower your tax liability. So in essence, they are used to reduce the normal tax a person usually pays. This puts more money back into your pocket, usually in the form of a tax refund from SARS, and is basically used to incentivize individuals to provide for their own healthcare in the form of a hospital plan or medical aid. Social grants have seen an increase of between 1.9% for foster care and 5% for the elderly, disabled and war veterans, as seen on this table. These increases are much needed and welcomed for those struggling to survive during these trying times, but this may not be the most sustainable way of solving the poverty problems our country faces, which I will get to in a minute. One great amendment to retirement annuities is that individuals will soon be allowed to allocate up to 35% of their portfolios to offshore assets, which is an increase from the previous year of 30%. This means that investors can now invest more of their money into more stable economies outside of South Africa that have shown in the past to beat the returns of the local South African market. This will hopefully motivate more people to consider investing in RAs, as one of its biggest drawbacks is the cap that Regulation 28 puts on these funds by keeping most of the allocation in local assets. This amendment will only be confirmed later in the year, but it is definitely something that I am personally really excited about. The employment tax incentive is an incentive aimed at encouraging employers to hire young and less experienced work seekers. It reduces an employer's cost of hiring young people through a cost-sharing mechanism with the government, while leaving the wage that the employee receives unaffected. The value of the employment tax incentive is increased by 50% from the 1st of March 2022 and will thus see an increase from a maximum of 1,000 Rand to a maximum of 1,500 Rand per month in the first 12 months and from 500 to a maximum of 750 Rand in the second 12 months of eligibility. This will hopefully encourage small businesses to reach out to more young people, which will hopefully improve the embarrassing youth unemployment rate of 50% moving forward. The most surprising and probably most welcomed announcement was that there will be no increase in the general fuel levy and road accident fund levy for the next tax year, which is a first since 1990. The cost of a litre of fuel rose by about 40% last year, and seeing that taxes make up about 1/3 of what motorists pay at the pump, this is much needed, as motorists have been suffering severely since December last year due to higher crude oil prices and a weaker rand. This does not mean that the fuel prices won't go up, as it most certainly would, but at least we know it won't be because of greedy taxes. In order to assist with the detection of non-compliance or fraud through the existence of unexplained wealth, the Minister proposed that all provisional taxpayers with assets above 50 million Rand be required to declare specified assets and liabilities at market value in their 2023 tax returns. This will bring those who practice illegal tax evasion practices to justice, which is necessary, as there are many corrupt individuals lurking in the shadows of South Africa who are draining the country's wealth without giving some of it back, thereby putting a much heavier burden on the middle income class, which is already suffering a lot. Corporate taxes will be reduced from 28% to 27% for companies who have years of assessments ending any date after 31 March 2023. This will bring much needed tax relief for small businesses, which will hopefully help to stimulate the economy, as this will open up some cash flow that can be reinvested to help these companies grow. As Mr. Enoch said, restructuring the corporate income tax system is an important part of our efforts to create a conducive environment for businesses to grow, to increase investment and to employ more people. we can expect more decreases in the future for the corporate tax in South Africa, as it will hopefully move to be more in line with the average rate of 23% that is set by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And then lastly, on the good side of things, the income tax brackets for small business corporations were also adjusted for inflation at a rate of 4.5% as shown in this table. Okay, now let's look at a couple of things that may be perceived as being bad for some consumers. Sinners will get sharper than bonus again this year, with an increase of between 4.5% and 6.5% of excise duties on alcohol and tobacco. Beer will cost an extra 11 cents per can, wine an extra 17 cents per bottle, sparkling wine an extra 76 cents per bottle, and spirits a whopping 4 rand and 83 cents extra per bottle. Smokers will have to cough up an extra 1 rand and 3 cents per packet, 37 cents per 25 grams of piped tobacco, as well as an extra 6 rand and 77 cents per 23 grams of rolled cigar. For those who think that vaping is cool, you guys will now also get taxed at least 2 rand and 90 cents per milliliter from the 1st of January 2023. The health promotion levy will also be increased to 2.31 cents per gram of sugar, so better go and pull your sweet teeth, as sugary drinks and treats will become even more expensive moving forward. The carbon tax is held to be the main mechanism to ensure we lower our greenhouse emissions. The carbon tax rate will be increased from 134 Rand to 144 Rand effective from 1 January 2022. The carbon fuel levy will also increase by 1 cent to 9 cents per litre for petrol and 10 cents per litre for diesel from 6 April 2022. Now, although this is actually a good thing for our environment, this does contribute to higher fuel prices, so hence why I listed it under the bad section. There were no changes to the contribution thresholds of tax-free savings accounts nor retirement annuities, and although this is not inheritably bad, some people were expecting at least an increase in the annual contribution limit of tax-free savings accounts in order to allow them to take more advantage of these retirement products, but hey, maybe next year. Other taxes like capital gains tax, dividend withholding tax, interest tax, donations tax, estate duty tax, and the turnover for micro businesses have all stayed the same, so no real benefits or loss can be seen from these sections. Okay, now obviously, no matter what Minister Godongwana says or does, some people will still be unsatisfied with his proposals. Now, although I am personally really impressed with what he has accomplished in the past 6 months, there are some major concerns regarding the budget speech and just the financial outlook in general of our country that we really need to talk about. Although the budget deficit, which is the difference between the total revenue and the total expenditure of the country, is expected to decrease from -5.7% to -4.2% in the next 3 years, debt as a percentage of GDP is expected to rise from 70% to 75%. This, alongside increasing debt servicing costs of an average increase of 10.7% per year over the next 3 years, puts our country in a very disadvantaged and vulnerable state. On average, 20 cents of every single rand collected in government revenue is now being spent on debt repayments, which is crowding out spending on health and basic education, which is in dire need of help. Debt, as Mr. Enoch said, should only be incurred when it finances investments that will drive economic growth instead of consumption. But seeing that our country has been suffering from excessive and unproductive debt buildup over the past decade, since about 2008, mostly due to corruption, this debt spiral is very difficult to get out of, as it puts a huge drain on available expenditure that could instead be used to fund investments and social services. But what is probably more concerning is that GDP growth is expected to fall drastically from 4.8% for 2021 to 1.7% by 2024. This will not solve the current job crisis our country is facing. With a current unemployment rate of 34.9% and youth unemployment of 50%, the government should be allocating more of its expenditure to building businesses that can create sustainable job opportunities instead of allocating such a big amount of almost 60% of expenditure to grants that do not do anything to improve our economy. Now, the last thing that I want to do is to get all political with this channel, but I strongly believe in the saying, give a man a fish and he can eat for a day. Teach a man how to fish and he can eat for the rest of his life. I understand that many people are suffering and that social grants help them to survive, but in the long term, it will be far more sustainable to invest in good companies that can employ these people and empower them to provide for their families instead of handing out grants just to try and win votes at the next election. And now the last two are what really boils my blood. A whopping 308 billion rand has been directed towards bailing out failing state-owned enterprises only in the last year. This is an enormous financial drain on the state of institutions that should be able to run efficiently and fund themselves. This is a critical problem our country faces in that flawed systems were put in place that do not result in sustainable growth. The Presidential State-Owned Enterprises Council will need to take a serious, good, hard look at improving the current system, which is obviously not working, and improve on it so that these SOEs can run as sustainable entities that are not reliable on constant bailouts from an already fragile fiscal system. And at present, 175 out of 257 municipalities in South Africa are in financial distress. This means that 68% of municipalities are either too corrupt or too incompetent or even both to run efficiently. Now, I cannot speak for everyone, but seeing that I currently stay in Van der Bijl Park, which falls under the Mfuleni municipality, I can definitely comment on the disastrous state of our roads and our public services. There isn't a single week that passes where we haven't had some form of power or water outage, and trying to navigate through all the potholes is like crashing into the moon. Not only is this a nuisance for everyone, but it is also a massive setback for businesses that often find themselves left without basic services or having to waste precious resources to create their own infrastructure. The minister added another 28.9 billion rand to fund local governments, which should in theory be welcomed, but it will not help if our local governments continue with their corruption and incompetence. Now, although the general feeling about the budget speech of 2022 is rather positive and that we as a country are slowly moving in the right direction, we still have a long way to go. What reassures me a little and what gives me a tad bit of hope is that Minister Godongwana acknowledged many holes in our governmental system and that he is facing them head on, addressing things like improper expenditure allocations to failing state-owned companies instead of frontline services and infrastructure, not being content with a GDP growth of below 2%, and that corruption is destroying and decaying our beloved country. As emphasized in his own words, corruption is a major blight on our country. It has lowered our economic growth potential, made us fiscally more vulnerable, and severely weakened the state's capability. Acknowledging that you have a problem is the first step in the right direction, and I really do want to believe that he will be able to turn around the country's economic outlook and help restore its credit ratings to attract more overseas investors in the near future. What do you guys think? Are you happy with what Mr. Enoch said? Let me know down in comments so that we can all have a constructive discussion regarding this matter. If you found this video helpful, then please drop the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Thank you very much. Have a lekker day. I'll see you in another video next week. Cheers.